Well, last night in my lecture, I talked about my recent infatuation with what I call visual music. So I am a composer, and I write a lot of traditional acoustic music, but I also recently have been interested in music that requires a kind of ocular experience. And these, in a sense, bifurcate into or trifurcate maybe into the area of sound sculpture design and construction, which are instruments that I've been designing and building out of junk and hardware and found objects mounted on electroacoustic soundboards, and those instruments are played with chopsticks and wind-up toys and knitting needles and violin bows and so forth. And they sound great, but they're also intended for their arresting visual properties. Theatric pieces, pieces that involve some sort of theater or choreography, and so that includes, for example, my piece Aphasia, which is a piece for hand gestures synchronized to sound, a piece like Echolalia, which is for 22 amplified Dadaist rituals, these kinds of crazy things that a performer does, and we're interested in the sound of those things, but also it's visually stunning to behold. Or hope that's a kind of an optimistic statement of the composer. They aspire to be visually arresting. And then, pieces like Straight Jacket, whose fourth movement is for artists working at amplified easels, who are actually playing in unison and making precisely the same sound, but the five players complete five completely different pictures, despite the fact that they've been making the same sounds. And pieces like Chun, which is a piece for three conductors and no players, which is so you have three conductors conducting ostensibly in silence, facing towards an audience, and they're synchronized in a polymetric and polyrhythmic manner. And that was based on the observation of two people having a virulent argument in sign language, which produced no decibels to speak of, but in a sense affectively was a very loud experience. And so one can ask the question of what musical parameters like loudness can be explored in visual rather than in aural terms. And then finally the last sort of third that I presented was about my notations, which themselves are increasingly pictographic and these strange, weird hieroglyphics on the page that could be experienced as visual art. And in one case, one piece called The Metaphysics of Notation, it was presented in a visual art museum for 1 year, and only on Fridays were there realizations of that pictographic score. It's a 72-foot wide score arranged in 12 6-foot wide by 10-inch tall segments. And just on Fridays it was realized in sound, but most of the time it was experienced as visual art. And those pictographs, incidentally, I should say, it's important that unlike a lot of the sort of determinate acoustic music that I compose, those pictographic scores come with no instruction whatsoever. So it's entirely up to the players to create their own assignation system of signs and then sounds or musical actions.